Hey guys, Ryan here. Tonight we journey into a world where emerald canopies swallow stone cities, and you probably won't survive this if you forget your mosquito repellent. Before we settle in, if this resonates with you, hit like and subscribe only if you're here for more of this vibe. Picture yourself stepping into a humid dawn, dew dripping from orchids onto your shoulders. You trudge past roots thicker than tree trunks, the air buzzing with unseen life. Now, go ahead and share your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's joining from their couch right now. Gently lower the lights, switch on that soothing fan breeze, and come with me as we unwind into tonight's adventure. You've just broken through jungle foliage to the rim of a hidden clearing, and there before you sprawls the remnants of a Maya settlement. Mainstream scholarship dates the earliest villages here to around 200 BC, when small agrarian communities began stacking stones into platforms and plazas. They leveled earth by hauling woven matting, probably ignoring the welt-inducing itch, to lay foundations for wooden homes. Historians still argue whether those first plazas were sacred gathering spaces or simply handy communal meeting points, but either way, you feel a prehistoric energy humming beneath your boots. As your eyes adjust, you notice curious carvings on a low stone lintel. A frieze of jaguar paws and maize ears hints at creation myths. The Maya believed gods fashioned humans from maize dough, nourishing one another in a cosmic buffet. You pause, did they really think their ancestors popped out of corn? Yes, and no one invited you to dinner, so keep that grain allergy in mind. But fringe researchers whisper that maize-kneading rituals doubled as ancient stress relief, a sort of primordial Play-Doh therapy. Whether such doughy devotion soothed worried chiefs or simply gave kids something to snack on remains in dispute. Historians still argue whether these ceremonial kitchens were communal or strictly elite affairs. Venturing deeper, you spot a series of earthworks rising above the undergrowth. These aren't natural hills but artificial terraces supporting early agricultural plots. The Maya pruned trees into living trellises, optimizing shade for beans climbing up beanstalks. You might chuckle at the thought of spider-like vines stealing the spotlight, but this agro-engineering fed dozens of families for centuries. Historians still argue whether the terrace system spread from highland centers or evolved independently in the Piton region. With each step, fallen columns and half-buried stele whisper stories. One half-legible glyph mentions a water dragon, a mythical creature said to patrol cenotes. The Maya revered these sinkholes as portals to the underworld, offering jade and honey in hopes of safe passage. Quirky explorers have speculated that they also tossed in rubber balls to test buoyancy and fish tastes. Needless to say, modern drinkers are grateful nothing sank to the bottom. The offer ceremony's details remain debated. Historians still argue whether sacrifices were symbolic gifts or involved actual offerings of animals. Your hand brushes a mossy stone bench, and a sudden breeze rustles nearby leaves. Though there's no wind gauge, you swear the air feels deliberately dramatic. These benches once served as meeting spots for extended clans, where councils decided planting seasons. A mainstream fact notes that early Maya leaders held power through lineage-based authority rather than popular vote, claiming divine descent from creator deities. Yet fringe voices suggest some local leaders rose through hit-and-run treasure raids, a sort of prehistoric guerrilla politics. Historians still argue whether such opportunistic chieftains were ever truly accepted by village elders. Turning your gaze skyward, shafts of sunlight pierce through the canopy, illuminating an ancient plaza floor marked by chipped plaster. Here, early Maya families enacted seasonal ceremonies, dancing to flute music and shell trumpets, which sounded suspiciously like a rubber duck squeak, according to one cheeky reconstruction. The very ground under your feet was laid with lime plaster mixed from crushed snail shells, a detail that, while odd, gave their courtyards a luminous sheen under moonlight. Historians still argue whether that glow served practical lighting or purely aesthetic showmanship. A sudden croak interrupts your reverie. A green tree frog lets loose a theatrical baritone. Nearby, a jaguar print cloth lies draped over a broken altar. Though long faded, it suggests textiles played roles in early rituals. Mainstream finds include spindle whorls and dyed cotton threads in elite burials, showing a sophisticated weaving tradition. Fringe theorists go further, claiming some garments encoded genealogies in color patterns, like wearable family trees. Historians still argue whether these patterns formed an ancestral resume or were mere decoration. You pause by the edge of a shallow pool, reflecting collapsing columns like watercolor brushstrokes. Natural springs like this fed the first Maya towns, but you can't help picturing a fringe theory that they also used crocodile dung sunscreen when swimming. Thankfully, no crocodile remains have been found wearing SPF 500. Practical reality suggests villagers scooped fresh spring water for daily use and ritual cleansings, often baptizing new leaders in these sanctuaries. Historians still argue whether those spring-fed rites conferred actual political legitimacy or were later invented by chroniclers. As dusk settles, fireflies blink along the pathways. You feel tiny again in this green cathedral. Remember that somber hush and the weight of ancient stones underfoot. The sun dips behind treetops, coloring the sky in bruised purples. You can almost hear echoing chants from centuries past. With your flashlight's beam trembling in your hand, you realize this opening chapter is just the first breath of a sprawling narrative. The Maya carved their beginnings out of wilderness, transforming rainforest into spectacle and ritual. And you, lucky, incurably curious you, are right here for every step. You step through the shadowed archway of what was once a soaring pyramid temple, and the air shifts. Humid breath of centuries-old mortar meets your own flaring nostrils. You pause, heart thudding like a drum in a rainstorm, as your hand grazes the weathered pyramid's base. Mainstream archaeology dates these stepped pyramids to about 250 AD, during the Maya Classic period, when rulers commissioned these monuments to bridge Earth with the heavens. Historians still argue whether these temples were primarily tombs or stages for theatrical religious spectacles, but either way, you can almost hear the echoes of drumming that probably blew out an eardrum or two. The pyramid before you rises in a series of terraces, each level narrower than the one below, culminating in a small sanctuary at the summit. Engineers marvel at how the Maya managed to haul limestone blocks, each weighing upwards of 100 kilograms, up ramps carved into the jungle floor. You glance at your own slightly less Herculean grocery bag carrying skills and silently congratulate them for not inventing potlatch Olympics. Historians still argue whether those ramps were straight, zigzagging, or perhaps even spiral, a design so fancy it would have inspired vertigo even in an ancient Instagram influencer. Climbing the worn steps, you feel them underfoot, rounded by centuries of sandals, moccasins, and who knows what barefoot antics. You inhale the scent of damp stone and moss, punctuated by the occasional whiff of guava from nearby trees. Fringe theorists claim that some pyramids were coated in stucco painted with crushed gemstones, shimmering like disco balls under the sun, though no glitter disco ball has been excavated to confirm this. Historians still argue whether the Maya ever intended these sparkly surfaces or if this idea is just archaeotainment at its finest. Reaching the midway landing, you rest against a carefully carved balustrade adorned with serpent motifs. This horizontal platform once hosted priests clad in feathered headdresses, directing crowds in chants that probably sounded something like an off-key karaoke session. Mainstream sources reference murals depicting sacrificial rites and royal ceremonies painted within temple chambers, though most are now faded into pastel whispers. Yet fringe enthusiasts maintain that hidden chambers behind those murals house secret libraries filled with untranslatable codices, books that would make your Kindle storage look like a dusty pebble. Your ascent continues, thighs burning like you've accidentally signed up for an ancient CrossFit ritual. You chuckle at the thought of personal trainers cataloging Maya workouts. Day 3, stair sprint to temple. Day 4, lift limestone blocks. Day 5, ritual fasting and interpretive dance. Historians still argue whether Maya elites endured such grueling regimens for spiritual purification or simply to impress their Instagram followers. Their subordinates. At the top, the jungle canopy falls away, unveiling the vast plaza below. You lean into the edge of the tiny sanctuary and feel the wind snatch at your shirt. Below, courtyards linked by sakbiob, raised causeways, stretch out like pale ribbons, connecting temples, bull courts, and palaces. Mainstream anthropology notes that these causeways often spanned kilometers, allowing messengers to dash messages in a manner that predated WhatsApp by nearly 2 millennia. Fringe lore suggests elite couriers communicated via smoke signals and carrier toucans, though toucans have a hard time reading your last emoji anyway. Historians still argue whether these causeways prioritized trade or strictly ceremonial processions. From this vantage point, you spot the temple's sanctuary, once topped by a wooden roof comb intricately carved with the ruler's visage. Although only fragments of combs remain, standard reconstructions show larger-than-life headdresses and fanged masks that probably gave visiting jaguars a run for their money in the intimidation department. Fringe writers speculate that these combs were so tall they doubled as solar panels, channeling divine energy. No archaeological evidence supports this, but imagine the Instagram caption, "Powered by Zeus Kinich solar tech." Historians still argue whether combs served structural or purely decorative functions. You press your palm against the cool threshold of the inner chamber, where a stone altar once held offerings of incense, jade beads, and perhaps the occasional chocolate bar. Rivers of cacao served as currency, after all. Mainstream fact: cacao beans literally counted as money, so gifting a king a ceramic vase brimming with beans was like handing over a small fortune. Fringe folks argue that some Maya flavored their beverages with saltwater and chili pods for avant-garde taste experiments. Historians still argue whether these spicy brews fueled religious ecstasy or just indigestion. A faint rumble underfoot stirs the air, and you picture the temple's acoustics amplifying chants so precise they could be heard across the plaza. Academic studies confirm that the pyramid's design created natural echo chambers, turning whispered prayers into booming declarations, no microphone required. Fringe audio buffs swear that priests used conch shells as ancient megaphones, though the resulting sound reportedly frightened off migrating storks. Historians still argue whether these acoustic tricks were intentional or happy architectural accidents. Taking a moment to trace carvings on a lintel, your fingertips find images of rain gods and maize deities, entwined in a cosmic dance. The rhythmic swirl of glyphs tells of kings communing with gods atop these pyramids, seeking celestial approval, or at least some free Wi-Fi signal from the heavens. Mainstream epigraphy identifies these glyphs as dedicatory texts, naming patrons and construction dates. Yet fringe epigraphers claim hidden subtexts reveal time travel blueprints, an idea that's fun until you realize you left your flux capacitor at home. Historians still argue whether any of these subtexts were intentional or just wishful thinking. Descending, you notice carved steps at the temple's base, each etched with footprints of deities. One misstep could have been seen as an ill omen. You gingerly place your foot in a carved print, half expecting a trapdoor to open. Thankfully, only a gecko darts out, betraying your less meteoric descent speed. Mainstream research shows that staircase dimensions varied greatly, suggesting each pyramid followed local customs rather than a single building code. Fringe historians argue some royal architects embedded secret messages in step dimensions, like architectural Easter eggs. Historians still argue whether these substep codes conveyed actual instructions or were elaborate pranks by bored stonemasons. Back on solid ground, you win through the plaza's shadows, glancing back at the pyramid silhouette against a pink-streaked sky. You remember the frigid sip of water you gulped earlier. Nothing tastes as refreshing as jungle water when your legs feel like jelly. The pyramid's presence lingers in your muscles and your mind, a testament to human ambition sculpted in stone. And though you didn't need a drone to appreciate its grandeur, you can almost see it from space, a monolithic crown jewel rising above the green sea. Historians still argue whether any ancient Maya ever dreamed of satellites watching their cities, but you definitely hope whoever invents time travel brings popcorn. You find yourself crouched before a low stone wall, the remaining plaster etched with looping curves and angular wedges that dance before your eyes like secret code. The Maya script sprawls across this panel, each glyphic block a window into life a millennium ago, yet you probably won't survive trying to memorize more than a dozen signs. Before we go deeper, if the ancient scribbles intrigue you, hit like and subscribe only if deciphering hieroglyphs is your idea of a midnight snack. Don't forget to drop your location and local time below. Some of you are literally decoding this at dawn. Gently lower the lights, switch on that soothing fan breeze, and let's glide into these mysterious symbols. You brush dust from one glyph, a stylized eye perched above an open mouth, and instantly sense its power. This is the sign for eat or consume. Mainstream epigraphy confirms the Maya possessed over 800 distinct glyphs, making their writing system the most sophisticated in pre-Columbian Americas. They combined logograms and syllabic signs to churn out narratives ranging from royal lineage to victory boasts, all carved in stucco or painted on ceramics. Historians still argue whether everyday scribes could read and write, or if literacy remained an elite monopoly. Next to the elite glyph, you spot a stylized jaguar paw. Together they might spell feast or reference a deity's appetite. Interpretations vary wildly. Fringe decipherers claim such combinations formed secret recipes for ritual meals, effectively culinary spellbooks. Would you follow a 1,200-year-old stew formula? Probably not, but the idea tickles your adventurous palate. Historians still argue whether any glyph sequences functioned as cookbooks or if this is archaeogastronomic wishful thinking. Your fingertips trace a block showing a human head with an elaborate headdress, likely a name glyph identifying a ruler. Mainstream scholars have successfully deciphered dozens of royal names, like Scroll Serpent and Storm Runner, etching them into the timeline of Maya dynasties. Yet entire codices remain unreadable. Wars and humidity reduced most texts to dust. Fringe hobbyists believe lost codices hide prophesies about interdimensional portals, sending conspiracy theorists into joyful overdrive. Historians still argue whether such tales stem from genuine artifacts or just the fervor of a fringe community. You crouch to examine a carved panel on a fallen lintel, the glyphs now chipped and weathered. One pair of signs seems to denote a date, a bar and dot notation indicating 7 and a glyph of Hab, their 365-day solar calendar month. Mainstream fact, the Maya combined the Hab with a 260-day ritual tonal pohuali to form the calendar round, cycling every 52 years. Historians still argue whether this calendrical system fostered apocalyptic fears or served purely agricultural planning. As your eyes adjust, you notice glyphs painted in faded pigments, reds, blues, and blacks, that once popped against light plaster. Fringe pigment analysts claim the Maya used ground cochineal insects for vivid reds and imported lapis lazuli, despite no lapis deposits in the region, suggesting trade networks extended far beyond known routes. Historians still argue whether these exotic pigments arrived via long-distance trade or were symbolic myths woven into scribal lore. Just beyond, a partially intact panel depicts a scene: a ruler kneels before a seated deity, hieroglyphic captions hovering above their heads. The text likely commemorates a bloodletting ritual, with terms like to draw and bone dust carved precisely. Mainstream readings confirm ritual self-sacrifice, piercing tongues or earlobes, poured into barbecue oven-like fires to summon gods. Fringe narratives speculate that Maya priests coated their tools in venomous sap for extra drama, though no chemical residues have been found. Historians still argue whether these sacrifices were theatrical displays for the masses or private spiritual dialogues. You stand and step into dappled sunlight filtering through canopy gaps, illuminating a stepped altar inscribed with long columns of glyphs. One column begins with the emblem glyph of the city, its unique logo, like an ancient NBA team mascot. Mainstream research shows over 30 emblem glyphs tied to major city-states: Tikal, Palenque, Köpen, each a badge of political identity. Historians still argue whether these glyphs denoted allegiance or were purely ceremonial tags. As you circle the altar, a stray parakeet cheeps overhead. Its vibrant green mirrors the pigment once used to outline glyph borders. Mainstream analyses detect traces of malachite in certain murals. Fringe enthusiasts claim some scribes added ground emerald dust for mystical sparkle, supposedly granting texts magical potency. Historians still argue whether emeralds held ritual significance or merely aesthetic value. Your gaze drifts to an overgrown niche holding a fragment of painted bark paper, part of a bound codex. Only 4 original Maya books survive, the rest were burned under Spanish Bishop Diego de Landa's infamous Auto da Fe in 1562 to eradicate pagan texts. A stark historical fact, Landa burned roughly 5,000 glyphic books in a single bonfire. Yet fringe historians argue whether some codices escaped overseas archives, hidden beneath monastery floors, an enticing treasure hunt. Historians still argue whether any undiscovered codices still lie buried under church expansions. Behind you, the jungle hush returns. You reflect on each glyph you've traced, the weeks of peering through microscopes scholars dedicate to matching shapes with sounds, arcane work turning stone into speech. The Maya script wasn't just decoration, it was a living medium of memory, political power, and spiritual communion. And though many symbols remain enigmatic, each carved block you've encountered tonight carves a deeper question. What stories vanished with the script's silent decay? Historians still argue whether we'll ever truly read the Maya's unspoken words or if some secrets sleep forever beneath jungle roots. You step away, sweat cooling on your skin as the twilight chorus of cicadas swells. In this glyph-strewn chamber, the past greets you in curving lines, inviting you to become both detective and dreamer. And while you won't decode the entire system tonight, you carry its riddles back into your own world. Maybe you'll sketch a glyph or two, just don't try that jaguar paw stew recipe. Remember, every carved mark was once painted with purpose, now a whisper in stone. You ease down onto a smooth stone bench at the edge of a vast plaza as the canopy above shimmers with late afternoon light. In your palm rests a circular limestone disc, etched with concentric rings and dotted bars. It isn't decoration but a gateway into Maya chronometry. The Maya engineered 3 interlocking calendars, the 260-day ritual tonal Pohuali, the 365-day solar hab, and the ever-rolling long count that logs days like beads on a rosary. Historians still argue whether these systems served as prophetic windows or primarily guided planting and harvest cycles. Fingertips tracing the Bayan dot inscription 9.12.3.0.16, you realize it corresponds to November 13th, 3114 BC, the fabled creation date when, according to Maya belief, the gods first shaped humanity. You probably won't survive trying to convert that without reference, so appreciate that number as their cosmic day 1. Fringe chronologists suggest secret codes in these dates predict alien arrivals, an idea more sci-fi script than solid archaeology. Historians still argue whether cosmic cycles held mystical weight or were simply bureaucratic bookkeeping. The disk's ton and Catan markers, cycles of 360 and 7,200 days, catch the dying light, shadows deepening the carved furrows. Scholars note that a Bacton, 144,000 days, spins around every 394 years, sparking theories about ritual renewals when cycles reset. Some think rulers staged grand ceremonies, ritually restarting time like resetting a countdown. Historians still argue whether these rituals realigned society or merely punctuated royal anniversaries. A gentle breeze carries the sweet tang of guava from nearby trees, mingling with the scent of warm stone under your thigh. Close by, a crystal-clear cenote mirrors the disk's carved rings, a reminder that the Maya often cast tokens into sinkholes during ceremonies. You won't be tasting these offerings, but modern divers recover them as watery time capsules. Fringe divers swear some disks hide invisible UV pigments only revealed under moonlight, although no scientific test has confirmed such secret inks. Historians still argue whether any hidden markings were ancient or imagined. You lean forward to examine glyphic carvings on the bench's rim. The phrase 13 Ajor repeats in flowing script. In the Maya solar lunar calendar, Ajor names the day lord ruling a 20-day cycle, infusing each date with personality and prophecy. Mainstream epigraphy teaches that pairing day names with numbers formed the Tzolk'in cycle, weaving fate and ritual together. Yet some fringe epigraphers propose these repeating phrases concealed coup instructions, an idea that thrills conspiracy buffs. Historians still argue whether such inscriptions hid cryptic messages or simply honored divine names. Squinting against the golden light, you imagine priests using obsidian mirrors to project calendrical symbols onto temple walls during solstice events. No intact mirror projector has surfaced, but thrill seekers scour ruins for glass shards that might prove this theory. Historians still argue whether elaborate light shows graced royal ceremonies or if they remain a romanticized rumor. Glancing at your own watch, an anachronistic flair, you appreciate the Maya's astonishing Venus tables. They track the planet's 584-day cycle to predict eclipses and time military campaigns, dubbing Venus the bringer of warfare. Mainstream studies show the Dresden Codex charts Venus rising and setting with remarkable accuracy. Debates continue. Historians still argue whether these astronomical records steered kings toward conquest or served religious rites, ensuring cosmic favor. You lean back against the bench, thinking of scribes chanting calendar counts in palaces. They recited dates in melodic rhythms keyed to drums and flutes, each day linked to a god and destiny. Fringe folklorists suggest that some rural storytellers still echo these chants in local legends, though no recordings verify a living oral tradition. Historians still argue whether any tunes survived centuries of cultural upheaval or vanished with colonial fires. A plaintive bird call drifts from the treetops as dusk bleeds orange across the plaza. You hold the disc aloft, letting fading sunlight play across its grooves. Sunbeams illuminate the carved numerals, as though time itself were briefly alive. The Maya aligned platforms and pyramids to mark equinoxes and solstices, ensuring each calendar year synced with celestial rhythms. Historians still argue whether such alignments unified commoners around planting seasons or reinforced elite power by claiming divine insight. Near your foot lies a small pile of broken calendrical discs, evidence of reforms when new rulers reset counters to inaugurate their reigns. Mainstream accounts describe ritual the wipe clean ceremonies, symbolically erasing an old order to birth a new one. Fringe anthropologists whisper that discarded discs served as apotropaic talismans buried beneath palace floors to curse deposed rivals. Historians still argue whether these resets functioned as propaganda or genuine spiritual rites. You gently set the disc aside next to a stray orchid petal. Above, the first stars emerge, tiny pinpricks in velvet sky. Surrounded by rustling leaves and distant frog choruses, time feels both anchored and awe-inspiring. The Maya did more than measure days, they sculpted existence into spirals, binding heaven and earth in an endless dance. Rising from the bench, you carry their temporal wisdom within you, ready to wander onward through history's winding corridors. You crouch beside a low altar slick with moss, the air thick with humidity and the faint echo of dripping water from a nearby cenote. Your fingertips hover above a carved stone blade, an obsidian shard sharpened to surgical precision. You probably won't survive touching it without wincing, but don't worry, it hasn't drawn blood in centuries. Before we dive in, if the suspense has your heart racing, hit like and subscribe only if you're here for more soft-spoken thrills. Share your location and local time below so I know who's braving this ritual with me. Gently lower the lights, switch on that soothing fan breeze, and let's feel the pulse of ancient devotion. A mainstream fact, Maya elites practiced bloodletting as a sacred duty, piercing tongues or earlobes to release drops of blood into fire or onto paper strips as offerings to gods. The liquid life essence, called Chulul, was seen as a bridge between mortals and deities. Historians still argue whether these rituals symbolized personal sacrifice or functioned as public spectacles reinforcing ruler legitimacy. You grip the hilt of the blade and imagine a royal priest, wrapped in jaguar pelts and crushed cochineal dust, tracing a cut across his tongue. You can almost taste the metallic tang carried by humid jungle breezes. Fringe theorists whisper that some lords mixed their blood with fragrant orchid oils to create divine perfumes, spritzed on attending nobles as a royal scent. Critics scoff, no residue analysis has revealed orchid compounds in sacrificial jars, but the idea of blood-based cologne definitely beats today's musk-scented aerosols. Historians still argue whether perfumed blood offerings ever really existed or are just archaeofiction. Leaning closer, you notice a shallow depression carved into the altar, once a pool for catching blood in neat spirals. Bright red pigment stains hint at centuries of repeated ceremonies, even though time has faded most traces. Mainstream archaeology confirms deep grooves in some altars, formed by thousands of drops punctuating the same spot. Historians still argue whether these basins served purely practical purposes or also held symbolic shape, perhaps emulating sacred cenotes. The scent of damp stone mixes with faint spirals of smoke from copal resin burning in a nearby incense brazier. You breathe in its sweet, pine-like aroma, imagining safflower petals scattered at your feet. Fringe anthropologists claim that copal smoke induced mild hallucinations, guiding participants into trance states, though modern tests show its psychoactive potential to be negligible. Historians still argue whether Maya priests intentionally used smoke for mind-altering ceremonies or if its role was strictly aromatic. A folded strip of amate paper lies at the altar's edge, edges charred from past offerings. Each drop of blood once fell on such papers, later burned in a purification fire. You pick up the brittle sheet, its fibers rough against your fingertips. Mainstream sources note that some papers carried glyphic notations, detailing dates and names tied to the ritual. Fringe epigraphers speculate hidden glyphs beneath blood stains reveal secret messages only visible under lunar illumination, a premise more Twilight Zone than academic. Historians still argue whether any text survived masked by sacrificial pigments. You trace an incised symbol at the altar's base, a stylized heart within a stepped fret motif. This glyph likely represented life or breath, tied intimately to the act of bloodletting. Mainstream epigraphy links these symbols to ancestral spirits beckoned through the ritual's pain. Historians still argue whether these glyphs indicated specific gods summoned or simply denoted the offering's nature. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth startles you, perhaps a spider-monkey scampering overhead, attracted by the glint of obsidian in your hand. You chuckle at the thought of primate onlookers witnessing a royal self-sacrifice. They'd probably mimic the ceremony with banana peels. Fringe memoirs from 19th-century explorers describe monkeys stealing ceremonial blades to carve cheek pouches, a tale more entertaining than verifiable. Historians still argue whether any primate participation really occurred or if it's just a jungle yarn. Your gaze drifts to an alcove where a throne once stood, its backrest carved with scenes of rulers drawing blood and offering it to feathered serpents. The stepped fret motif repeats in relief around the seat, connecting royal authority with mortal sacrifice. Mainstream anthropology highlights that self-inflicted wounds affirmed a ruler's divine descent, proving they carried Chulul from birth. Historians still argue whether peasants witnessed these rites or if they remained hidden within palace walls. You rise, hands still tingling from imagined ceremonial pain, and move toward a row of ceramic vessels painted with red bands. These blood pots once held offerings to gods of rain and maize. Mainstream fact: jars have been excavated containing residues matching human hemoglobin traces. Historians still argue whether those vessels stored only sacrificial fluids or mixed other libations for ritual toasts. A whisper of wind caresses your exposed skin, carrying the faint trill of a toucan's call. In the dim light, you spot a small, engraved glass bead, unlikely material for the era, nestled beside the altar. Fringe proponents argue that a lost Maya glassmaking tradition introduced early translucent beads used in rituals, predating European contact. Yet no kill remains have been found, and chemical analyses link shards to colonial-era production. Historians still argue whether any pre-Columbian glass artifacts truly existed or were misidentified modern relics. You turn to leave the chamber, the blade's phantom weight still lingering in your grip. The dance of smoke, stone, and blood echoes in your mind, a ritual symphony played out over centuries. You carry a newfound respect for the courage of those ancient priests, wading into pain to commune with gods. In today's world, the only sacrifice you might brave is skipping your morning coffee, far less dramatic, but arguably more regretful. Stepping into the twilight beyond the altar, dragonflies flash like living sparks, and the jungle hush deepens. The ritual stones hold silence now, but you feel their pulse in your veins, a reminder that sacrifice once stitched mortal and divine together. You exhale, anticipation fluttering, eager to discover what comes next in this unfolding tapestry of ancient majesty. You step onto a sun-baked plaza where two massive pyramid-topped complexes loom on opposite ends, their weathered stones glowing bronze in the late afternoon light. Between them stretches a broad avenue paved with worn limestone slabs, a stage set for epic rivalries. Mainstream archaeology identifies this as the arena where city-states clashed for regional dominance, most famously between Tikal and Calakmul. Historians still argue whether these conflicts were driven by dynastic vendettas or by competition for vital trade routes. As you wander the causeway, your sandals clicking against centuries-old stone, you overhear the faint echo of chanting, an ancient replay, as if the ghosts of royal courts still debate treaties under your feet. Fringe theorists propose that subterranean tunnels linked rival cities, enabling midnight sabotage missions and vine-swinging espionage worthy of a jungle James Bond. No tunnel entrances have ever been confirmed, but the idea of Maya spies in loincloths has its cinematic appeal. Historians still argue whether any secret passages ever existed or if they're pure archaeological wishful thinking. Ahead, you encounter two carved stelae facing one another, each adorned with the profile of a different ruler brandishing a spear. These monuments depict the great Star Wars of the classic era, battles that shaped Mesoamerican geopolitics. One stele commemorates a Tikal victory dated to 562 AD, carving the fallen foe in graphic detail. Mainstream epigraphy confirms that broken glyph sections on these stele reference captured nobles and tribute collections. Historians still argue whether these triumphs were public morale boosters or propaganda crafted by palace scribes. You pause at a section of the plaza littered with arrowheads and slingshot stones, icy reminders that warfare left its mark on both landscape and psyche. Mainstream finds include obsidian blades sharpened with diamond-tipped tools, testament to the Mayas' exceptional craftsmanship. Fringe enthusiasts claim the Maya affixed poison-tipped darts for extra lethality, using milky sap from the castor oil plant. Though some castor seeds have been found near battleground sites, no conclusive toxin traces survive. Historians still argue whether poison warfare played any significant role or if it's simply a macabre rumor. Glancing east, you spot a ball-court sunken eye-shaped alley, flanked by high stone walls decorated with bas-reliefs. This was no mere game, it was ritualized combat, where players channeled divine forces through athletic prowess. Mainstream anthropology notes that while exact rules remain unknown, the aim likely involved sending a hard rubber ball through stone rings without using hands, a feat that could bruise your ribs just watching. Historians still argue whether game losers faced execution or whether that's the overblown dramatic flair of colonial chroniclers. You venture closer, imagining dexterous athletes adorned with padded belts and protective yokes, necks braced by stone collars. Fringe sports historians argue that some courts incorporated pressure plates triggering hidden blades for rule infractions, a lethal referee system straight out of a gladiator show. No mechanical traps have been found, thankfully, so your biggest hazard here is a rogue gecko, not a man-sized spear trap. Historians still argue whether any Maya ball game ever ended in unexpected mortal peril or if that's just hyperbole. Turning to a carved panel beside the court, you find a scene of captive nobles paraded before rulers, their faces etched with resignation. Mainstream historians confirm that taking high-status prisoners, rather than killing enemies outright, proved more profitable. Ransoms, marriage alliances, and labor levies enriched victorious city-states. Historians still argue whether the ransom system fostered a cycle of hostage exchange or if it bred deeper enmity between polities. You cross the plaza to inspect the north platform, where a hastily erected shrine marks where a major battle once erupted. Broken pottery shards and charred incense burners are scattered like breadcrumbs of a grisly feast. Mainstream excavation reports note thick ash layers, indicating large-scale ritual fires, perhaps to purify the ground after massacres. Historians still argue whether these wildfires were battlefield aftermaths or controlled bonfires for seasonal festivals. A sudden breeze stirs motes of pollen around you, and you spot a faded mural behind the shrine showing warriors brandishing shields embossed with jaguar and eagle motifs. These animal emblems signify different warrior societies, much like medieval knights bearing coats of arms. Fringe heraldry buffs allege that some warriors dyed their shields with crushed spider silk to achieve an otherworldly sheen. Given the silk's fragility, few samples remain. Historians still argue whether such elaborate shield decorations ever existed or if they sprang from modern imaginations. Your gaze drifts upward to a watchtower perched on a nearby pyramid's corner. Mainstream interpretations state these towers served as lookout points for signaling approaching armies with mirrors or fire. Historians still argue whether visual codes transmitted complex messages or stuck to basic alerts like enemy coming and bring more snacks. Fringe network theorists suggest the Maya established a full relay system of signal stations across 100 miles, creating a pre-Columbian optical telegraph. Though the landscape supports such placements, no direct evidence of a network scale has surfaced. Historians still argue whether Maya communication grids rivaled 19th-century semaphore lines. You meander to an altar carved with entwined serpents and the name of a victorious Calakmul ruler. The inscription boasts of a triumph over a rebel faction, though glyphic damage makes the details fuzzy, like reading a tweet after a software update. Mainstream translators piece together fragmented texts to reconstruct battle narratives, from siege tactics to victory feasts. Historians still argue whether these feasts served as genuine celebrations or state-sponsored spectacles to intimidate dissenters. A playful gust rattles a palm frond overhead, showering tiny fronds onto your head like confetti. You grin at the absurdity, a triumph lap by the jungle itself. Soldiers may have fought here, but today only cicadas sound off and vines drape like victory banners. You brush off the leaves, feeling oddly triumphant yourself for having walked these very stones. Ancient warriors forged history with swords and alliances, now you navigate it with sandals and a thirst for stories. As the sun dips low, your shadow stretches across the plaza, merging with the monuments of rivalry and conquest. You let your fingers brush a carved corner, recalling the thrill of those long-ago clashes. Though the era of spears and shields has passed, the echoes of conflict still linger in these stones, waiting for curious souls like you to listen. You rise, ready to follow the next trail deeper into this civilization's grand theater of power and politics. You wander along a narrow raised causeway, the stone underfoot worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, and imagine the cacophony of merchants hawking their wares in hushed tones beneath swaying palms. All around, plastered platforms once cradled stalls brimming with vibrant goods, and you half expect to see a lacquered pot of cacao powder gently rolling toward you. Mainstream archaeology tells us that the Maya maintained extensive trade networks stretching from the highland jade quarries of the Motagua Valley to coastal trading ports on the Gulf of Mexico, moving precious greenstone over hundreds of kilometers long before the invention of wheelbarrows, so don't complain about potholes on your morning commute. Historians still argue whether those routes functioned as state-controlled arteries or grew organically through local barter. You pause beside a low bench etched with footprints, where traders likely exchanged goods under the watchful gaze of merchants' guilds. A fringe theory insists that the Maya deployed giant reed rafts outfitted with paddle-like sails to drift goods downriver at night, guided by glowworms tied to the prow, a tactic that, if true, would have made crossing crocodile-infested waters feel like a bioluminescent rave. Scientific dives in cenotes have uncovered scale fragments suggesting small craft, but no bioluminescent rope lights have surfaced. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal flotillas were real or just a sailor's tall tale whispered under thatched roofs. Further along, you find a pile of broken ceramic vessels, each once embossed with intricate painted scenes of traders in feathered headdresses. Mainstream studies show that some jars contained residue of cacao, chili, and corned beer, indicating they served as storage for luxury consumables during long-distance journeys. You can almost taste the smoky spice mixed with chocolate on your tongue, but you probably won't invite that dish to your next dinner party. Fringe gastronomes speculate that certain vessels doubled as fermentation chambers for early Maya vodka made from agave, an idea that would have granted party at Palenque a whole new meaning. Historians still argue whether pre-Columbian distillation existed or if that's a misreading of residue analysis. Your eyes drift to a half-buried greenstone bead, polished smooth as a river pebble. Jadeite wasn't merely decorative, it symbolized life and renewal, and burials of elite nobles often included intricate jade mosaics. Mainstream sources confirm that sourcing jade required specialized knowledge of geology and vast tribute payments, cementing social hierarchies. Yet fringe mineralogists propose that an unknown volcanic eruption once deposited jade boulders far from the Motagua Valley, suggesting natural dispersal rather than human transport. The idea is tempting, but no volcanic ash layer has been matched to such an event. Historians still argue whether jade ever traveled via unexpected geological shortcuts or strictly by human hands. Ahead, a series of stuccoed stalls rise from the undergrowth, their surfaces painted in faint hues of red and black. In life, these walls bore glyphic signage advertising commodities like quetzal feathers, salt blocks, and exotic shells. Mainstream research identifies bright spondylus shell traded across Mesoamerica as far north as the American Southwest, where its vibrant pink hue fetched high social value. You probably won't find spondylus beads at your local craft fair, but the Maya prized them like the rarest gemstones. Fringe collectors swear some shell pieces were enchanted by coastal shamans using shark-tooth daggers dipped in spiny lobster blood, an odd ritual that modern marine biologists haven't corroborated. Historians still argue whether such enchantments existed or blossomed from romanticized lore. A sudden breeze stirs the fronds overhead, and you catch a whiff of salt mingling with earth, a reminder of the coastal traders who hauled salt brine in clay pots from evaporation flats to highland marketplaces. Salt served as both seasoning and preservative, and mainstream findings reveal salt blocks stamped with city emblems, functioning almost like currency. Historians still argue whether salt block standardization prefigured coinage or remained strictly as a commodity. Your feet crunch across a scattering of obsidian flakes, sharp-edged remnants of trade in volcanic glass prized for crafting razor blades and ritual mirrors. Mainstream evidence shows that most obsidian came from highland Guatemala or the Mexican highlands, distributed widely by merchant caravans. Fringe archaeologists dream of discovering a lost Maya silicon mine where they supposedly processed obsidian in workshops equipped with water-cooled anvils, a lot of speculation with no anvil crumbs to confirm. Historians still argue whether large-scale obsidian workshops existed or if artisans worked small-scale in household niches. Leaning against a carved pillar, you sketch out a mental map, the flow of cacao from tropical lowlands, the route of turquoise via the Gulf Coast, and the jade corridor through mountain passes. Each commodity carves a thread in the web of Maya connectivity. Yet a curious artifact lies before you, a small copper bell, utterly out of place in these pre-Columbian ruins. Mainstream consensus holds that metallurgy remained rudimentary, with no evidence of native copper smelting. But fringe metal detectors have turned up tiny copper ingots at sites far from known trade routes, hinting at early experimentation or post-contact contamination. Historians still argue whether these metal bits represent genuine pre-contact trade or accidental deposits from later visitors. Nearby, a fresco fragment shows traders seated cross-legged, tallying goods with perishable knotted cords, an abacus-like system called quipu by some scholars. Mainstream research acknowledges Maya counting knots on cords for record keeping, though the term quipu more commonly applies to Andean civilizations. Historians still argue whether Maya used similar knotted cord systems independently or borrowed the concept through long-distance contact. Finally, you step into a dim corridor lined with niches holding tiny glass vials shaped like corn kernels, odd by any standard. Mainstream interpretation views them as colonial-era relics misplaced by later occupants, though a few argue for pre-contact glass innovation. Fringe futurists propose that the Maya harnessed early fiber optic technology, using glass rods to transmit light between temples, a notion so wild it makes you thankful for LED bulbs. Historians still argue whether any ancient Maya experimentations with glass extended beyond decorative beads. You emerge from the corridor into a courtyard bathed in golden light, steam rising from sun-warmed stones. Trade networks once pulsed through here like arteries of commerce, carrying luxuries and necessities alike. Some theories stretch the imagination: bioluminescent river rafts, secret glass labs, maritime copper caravels, but the concrete shards of pottery, jade beads, and cacao husks anchor you in a world both wondrous and pragmatic. You lift your gaze to distant pyramids, imagining the goods piled high in merchant canoes and wagons, fortunes shifting at the speed of human hands. The trade roads lie silent now, but their echoes remain etched in every polished stone and carved vessel you've passed. You climb a gentle rise revealing a circular stone platform ringed with low, evenly spaced pillars, their tops worn smooth by centuries of sky-gazing priests. The limestone radiates warmth, and you feel drawn to its center, as if the very earth underfoot pulses with celestial intent. Mainstream archaeology confirms that the Maya constructed dedicated observatories, like the one at Uxmal, and aligned them precisely to mark solstices, equinoxes, and Venus critical risings. Historians still argue whether these structures served primarily as scientific tools or as stages for ritualized performances under star-bright skies. At the platform's edge, you spot a carved bench oriented toward the horizon's northernmost sunset point. You settle into its cool firmness and let the breeze finger through your hair as you scan the heavens. Above, the sky is velvet blue, soon to darken into ink black. Fringe astronomers claim that Maya observers used polished obsidian mirrors to reflect sunlight into hidden chamber interiors, projecting moving star charts on plastered walls, a sort of ancient planetarium. No mirrored projections have been found intact, but the idea of jungle light shows has a certain cinematic flair. Historians still argue whether any projection devices existed or if the Maya simply relied on direct sightlines. You shift your gaze to a slender slit carved between two pillars. This narrow opening frames the winter solstice sunrise perfectly, illuminating a painted glyph of the sun god each December 21st. Mainstream epigraphy notes that the glyph bears the name Kainichajor, linking each solar return to the reigning king's divine patronage. Yet some fringe chronologists suggest that the glyph's pigments contain trace amounts of luminous minerals, so under torchlight, dawn ceremonies would have glowed like a neon sunrise. Historians still argue whether the Maya mixed luminescent compounds into their paints or if this sparkly legend stems from modern wishful thinking. With dusk settling, you lift a small flask of water to your lips, recalling how the Maya charted lunar cycles on portable bone staves. Archaeologists have unearthed mnemonics carved into animal bones, marking lunar phases to time planting and harvest, a testament to the Maya's agricultural astronomical fusion. You'll need better balance than a bone stave to juggle these cycles. Historians still argue whether lunar observations mainly benefited farmers or were kept secret for priestly elites. A sudden glow from a nearby cenote catches your eye. In the deep water, you glimpse the ghostly reflection of Orion's belt mapped onto rippling surface patterns, nature mirroring the heavens in a watery hall of mirrors. Fringe divers swear that ritual offerings thrown into cenotes contained crushed lapis lazuli, creating underworld pools speckled with blue flecks, symbolizing star showers. Although none has been recovered, the notion suggests a captivating partnership between earth and sky. Historians still argue whether any celestial-linked offerings ever contained exotic minerals. You spot a pair of tall pillars connected by a horizontal lintel carved with overlapping glyphic circles. These rings denote the Venus cycle, carefully recorded in the Dresden Codex to within minutes of modern calculations. Mainstream studies show the Maya tracked Venus' 584-day cycle to predict eclipses and guide military campaigns, a Venus the harbinger of both harmony and havoc. Historians still argue whether Venus tables served more as astrological manuals for warfare or as sacred prayers to the morning star. A soft wind stirs the grasses around the observatory, and you recall hearing that some stargazers wore ornate headdresses encrusted with jade stars, each bead representing a constellation. Fringe costumers claim that these reflective ornaments sparkled so brilliantly they aided visual navigation of the Milky Way. But given the jade's opacity and weight, practical use seems questionable. Historians still argue whether any headgear served astronomical purposes or functioned purely as regal pageantry. You lie back on the stone, tracing the silhouette of the platform against the emerging Milky Way. The galaxy's pale swath arches overhead, and you imagine Maya priests scanning it for dark rifts, like the one the Inca called the Llama. Mainstream astronomy acknowledges the Maya recognized dark star constellations, shapes formed by dark nebulae, linking them to underworld myths. Historians still argue whether these dark constellations held calendrical significance or remained mythological curiosities. Overhead, the first stars of Gemini emerge, and you whisper their Maya name, the twins. They symbolize duality, birth and death, day and night, woven into temple iconography across sites. Mainstream iconographers find twin figures flanking thrones, underscoring the balance of power. Yet fringe mythologists argue that each star pair encoded secret messages about future dynastic alliances, a kind of stellar diplomacy. Historians still argue whether any political plans rode on starlight or if that's just cosmic wish-casting. You sit up and run your hand along a low stone table marked by carved notches, the remains of a star-charting tool known as the lunar table. Astronomers still use replicas to track modern lunar eclipses, marveling that these ancient tables hit within hours of precision. Historians still argue whether the Maya developed these tools independently or borrowed methods from nearby cultures. A distant cricket's trill synchronizes with a rising breeze, and you feel the cool kiss of night. The horizon glows faintly where stars will soon blaze into view. Above you, the observatory's pillars stand sentinel, guardians of celestial secrets. Whether they train priests' eyes or awed commoners, these structures braided sky and stone into one seamless tapestry. You rise from the platform, the memory of star-mapped stones lingering in your mind like constellations burned on your retinas. You walk away beneath a canopy of fireflies, their tiny points of light blinking in homage to the stars. The Maya looked upward seeking patterns, divination, and deeper connections, the same impulse driving you to glance skyward tonight. With each step, you carry a fragment of their celestial devotion, ready to navigate both their ancient observations and your own star-studded dreams. You push aside a thicket of vines and step into a sunlit courtyard where cedar-scented smoke drifts from smoldering incense basins. Centuries ago, this same courtyard bore witness to the first tremulous steps of Spanish conquistadors, their steel armor glinting like foreign stars against the jungle's green embrace. You probably won't survive their shock of cold metal and unfamiliar tongues, but tonight you get to retrace their uneasy arrival. Before we settle in, if the clash of worlds sends a shiver down your spine, hit like and subscribe only if you crave more whispered thrillers beneath the fan's hum. Drop your location and local time below. Perfect. Now let's step through Whispered Chronicles straight into the 16th century. Mainstream chronicles record that Hernan Cortés' emissaries first glimpsed Maya cities around 1524 AD, encountering rulers who watched these newcomers with both curiosity and suspicion. Their horses stamped and snorted, beasts the Maya had never seen, sounding like thunderous metal birds. Historians still argue whether those horses, used for mounted cavalry charges, tipped the scales of conquest or if epidemic disease inflicted a heavier blow on indigenous resistance. You almost stumble over a half-buried cannonball, iron sphere polished by centuries of rain, and wonder at its journey from Spanish galleons to this forest floor. That cannonball likely roared across coastal hills before someone hauled it inland for ceremonial display, perhaps as a trophy of power. Fringe legends assert that some Maya shamans captured cannon fire's echo in clay whistles for rainmaking rituals, convinced the booming sound summoned storm deities. No whistle-bearing gunpowder residue has been confirmed, but the idea conjures images of fist-pumping sorcerers channeling artillery into thunderclouds. Historians still argue whether seismic changes in ritual practice emerged from or of gunpowder or from deeper spiritual adaptations. Nearby, a mossy column stands carved with a Spanish cross overlaying a carved glyph. It may mark a forced conversion site where priests draped crucifixes over Maya altars. Mainstream painters' accounts describe friars systematically replacing indigenous icons with Christian symbols, erasing centuries of religious imagery. Yet some altar carvings show cross shapes that predate Spanish arrival, hinting at curious convergences in symbolism. Historians still argue whether these pre-contact cross motifs reflected universal solar symbolism or represented independent prototypes that Europeans later co-opted. A faint clang draws your attention to a broken musket barrel repurposed as an irrigation pipe, ingenious recycling long before sustainability was cool. Farmers likely hammered the barrel flat and gouged channels for water to flow toward maize fields. Fringe environmental historians argue that this practice birthed early agro-industrial fusion, a precursor to modern drip irrigation systems. Without concrete documentation, however, the idea remains speculative. Historians still argue whether colonial metal reuses spurred genuine agricultural innovation or simply served pragmatic repairs. You brush ash from a weathered stone bench where emissaries once debated with Maya nobles. Mainstream letters from Dominican friars describe heated theological debates held on such benches, conversations punctuated by the hiss of burning sermons in Nahuatl and Quechua. Yet only a handful of Mayan language catechisms survived, suggesting scribes translated basic prayers but largely ignored deeper doctrinal texts. Historians still argue whether this limited scriptural approach reflected linguistic barriers or deliberate avoidance of challenging indigenous cosmologies. Overhead, a chandelier-like lantern swings from a vine, likely a colonial-era relic repurposed from an oil lamp. Spanish lamps burned olive oil and scented herbs, scents utterly foreign to Maya noses. Fringe olfactory researchers propose that Maya healers infused these lamps with local resins, creating a hybrid incense that served both Christian and traditional ceremonies. Laboratory analyses have detected mixed resin traces in some lamps, though contamination from later restorations complicates the picture. Historians still argue whether these blended aromas fostered syncretic worship or masked coercive conversion. You find a partially intact pedestal baptismal font carved from local limestone. According to mainstream baptismal records, friars immersed dozens of Maya children here, believing water would wash away ancestral idols. Some modern descendants celebrate these fonts as sites of cultural resilience, reclaiming baptism as a rite of communal identity rather than conquest. Historians still argue whether baptism functioned chiefly as a coercive tool or evolved into a voluntary choice embraced by certain communities. Next to the font rests an obsidian blade stained with red ochre, a curious juxtaposition of indigenous ritual and colonial punishment. Mainstream legal codes instituted by colonial authorities authorized corporal punishment for unbaptized converts, wielding blades to carve crosses on knuckles or palms. Fringe criminologists suggest some Maya elders reversed these punishments into protective talismans, binding the blades in moss and carrying them for luck. Though no talisman blade fusion has been documented, the narrative underscores human ingenuity in subverting oppression. Historians still argue whether such symbolic repurposing occurred widely or remains anecdotal. A narrow corridor leads you to a secluded room where a half-burned fragment of parchment lies. The faded text is Latin, an excerpt from a sermon on original sin. Mainstream forensics date the parchment to the late 16th century, likely discarded by friars during rebellions. Yet beneath the Latin you glimpse faint Maya glyphs, possibly overlaid later as a form of spiritual annotation or protest. Historians still argue whether indigenous scribes risked inscribing banned symbols within missionary texts or if later caretakers accidentally layered scripts. You emerge into a courtyard where a grand saber tree has grown through the cracked stones, its massive roots twisting around a colonial bell. That bell once pealed for mass, its sonorous call summoning converts at dawn's first light. Fringe dendrochronologists propose nailing small copper plaques to the saber, now rusted, but argue whether bark rings count the years of syncretic worship or purely natural growth. Historians still argue whether the tree's intertwined roots symbolized resilience or the unintended consequence of neglecting sacred spaces. You step forward, leaving behind the colonial echoes and stepping once more into verdant silence. The past here is neither wholly conquered nor wholly preserved, it's a conversation etched in stone, wood, and blood. As you press on toward the next chapter, you carry the weight of both histories, a people's storied resistance and the foreign forces that tried to rewrite their world. History's final verdict remains unwritten, and scholars still argue whether the true legacy lies in loss or in resilient rebirth. You step into a sun-dappled courtyard alive with laughter and song, where modern Maya families gather beneath freshly painted murals that echo ancestral glyphs. You probably won't survive the urge to smile, but go ahead, let it spread. Mainstream fact: today's Maya people number in the millions across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, preserving languages like Yucatec, Quechua, and Mam despite centuries of suppression. Historians still argue whether colonial-era policies irreversibly fractured Maya identity or inadvertently strengthened communal bonds through shared resistance. A vendor sells hand-woven huipiles whose bright geometric patterns recall ancient pictorial narratives. You run your fingers across woven cotton, noting each diamond and zigzag encodes clan symbols, an art form passed mother to daughter through generations. Fringe folklorists claim some huipil motifs hide secret healing prayers stitched in color sequences, decoded only during full moons. No one's tested a moonlight unveiling, but the thought of lunar embroidery classes is delightfully whimsical. Historians still argue whether any hidden prayers were intentional encryptions or simply decorative traditions imbued with later meaning. Nearby, a group of youth practice Maya dance atop a stone platform once used for rituals. Their rhythmic footfalls echo classic ballgame beats, flutes and rattles propelling each step. Mainstream anthropology notes that these revival dances celebrate planting festivals and mark community solidarity. Yet fringe revivalists assert they're channeling ancestral spirits through carefully choreographed trance states. Entranced teenagers claim they sometimes drift into visions of jaguar guardians. Historians still argue whether such trance experiences are cultural memory resurfacing or contemporary creative expression. You wander past a modern classroom where children learn hieroglyphic basics on digital tablets, replicating ancient strokes with styluses. Mainstream education initiatives partner with universities to revitalize Maya script, teaching literacy in both Spanish and indigenous languages. Historians still argue whether digital tools can fully capture the nuance of carved glyphs or risk oversimplifying rich meanings. A sudden breeze carries smoke from a nearby ceremonial fire, where elders burn copal resin as a blessing. You inhale the resin's sweet pine aroma, imagining ceramic censers glowing in dusk. Fringe spiritualists claim that copal from specific sacred groves yields visions of past kings, and some swear they've glimpsed phantom processions of feathered serpents rising from the smoke. While no one's documented serpent apparitions beyond personal testimonies, the invitation to believe in magic lingers. Historians still argue whether modern copal rites directly mirror pre-Columbian rituals or evolved through syncretic adaptations. You pause before a monument unveiled just last year, a limestone stela carved with both Maya glyphs and a modern dedication. The plaque honors activists who fought for land rights and language preservation. Mainstream media coverage highlights this as a landmark in cultural recognition, with governments finally acknowledging centuries of marginalization. Still, historians debate whether these official acts represent genuine restitution or symbolic gestures lacking substantive change. Children dart through frangipani trees, chasing kites patterned like Quetzalcoatl's twin feathers. You catch a glimpse of a ribbon tail swirling overhead, and you recall stories of ancient sky ceremonies launching feathered banners to greet Jupiter. Fringe kite crafters insist their designs capture cosmic energy, claiming high-flying kites reveal star alignments when viewed from below, a spectacle that, if real, would be the ultimate outdoor planetarium. Historians still argue whether ancient Maya ever flew ceremonial kites or if this is modern innovation inspired by heritage. From a nearby cafe, you sip hot chocolate made from heirloom cacao beans, roasted and ground by local cooperatives. Mainstream food historians praise this as a sustainable revival of traditional crops, empowering women farmers. Yet fringe gastronomes claim that chewing raw nibs under moonlight blesses your digestive chakra, a practice lacking clinical study but rich in Epicurean lore. Historians still argue whether any pre-Columbian diets included raw cacao rituals or if that's just culinary cosplay. As dusk settles, you join a circle of storytellers seated around a fire pit hewn from ancient stones. Each voice weaves myth and memory, tales of hero twins conquering underworld realms, of jaguar warriors patrolling moonlit paths, of maize god rising every spring. Mainstream folklore studies applaud this as vital cultural transmission, sustaining oral traditions once threatened by colonial bans. Historians still argue whether these stories retain their original narrative structures or have morphed through centuries of adaptation. You rise, the music of song, story, and laughter mingling in your chest. The living Maya community stands not as a relic but as a vibrant thread in a tapestry still woven by each new generation. Their ancestors' stones and script endure in heartbeat rhythms, brightly painted crafts, and the steady beat of cultural renaissance. And you, the curious wanderer, have witnessed the whispers of legacy echoing louder than any ghostly ruin, affirming that ancient voices still speak through living flesh and blood. Now let your breathing slow, each inhale and exhale drawing you gently back from the firelit circle to the quiet of your own room. Feel the warmth of community linger in your chest, then dissipate like smoke drifting toward midnight sky. The distant hum of cicadas fades into soft white noise, and the fragrant scent of copal transforms into memory's gentle embrace. Your eyelids grow heavy as the day's concerns soften into a blur, the rich textures of huipil and cacao weaving into drowsy patterns behind closed lids. Imagine the kites in the dusk sky dissolving into constellations, each ribboned echo mapping a path in your dreams. Trust that the Maya revival's heartbeat pulses in quiet solidarity, ancient resilience cradling the future in tender rhythm. Let go of the need to remember every detail, instead, carry the sense of wonder and possibility into sleep, where stories unfurl in soft focus scenes. Tomorrow, you may rise with a fresh spark of curiosity, but for now, sink into the hush, where whispers of stone and song lull you toward restful oblivion. Sweet dreams, traveler.